Good evening, friends. First and foremost, let me thank Plethora Blogazine as well as poet and author Nader Shah for inviting me to talk about historical fiction and about my books. So thank you so much, friends, for being here. Now, historical fiction has started becoming very popular, possibly because history, which was very drab in the classroom, seems to come alive when people read about the same people and events in the form of a story. But isn't that what history really is? It is a story that is developed by interpreting evidence such as monuments, written records, coins, or pottery dug up by archaeologists. But a writer of historical fiction has a tougher job. First, the writer must do extensive research, and that research can be done through books written about the person or the event, maybe through films, through PDFs of recorded history. Pranay, welcome. Mona Lisa, welcome. So that's how I do it. I usually will first start off with books that have been written about the person or the event, and then I look for films, documentaries which could have been made on that person. And then I go through PDFs of recorded history. I download blogs by historians. Of course, the most effective research is to actually visit the setting. So this was my experience when I was, developing or doing research for Padmavati. So I went to Chittorgarh. And when I went there and I spoke to the people who were there, and they gave me so many tales, so many legends, so many myths about Padmavati. And I actually saw her palace, in the middle of the lake. I saw the tunnel where she had reportedly committed Johar, and it all gave me goosebumps. And definitely it made a big difference when I was writing about it, because, the description completely came alive because I had been there. But of course, it's not possible always to visit the setting. Like, for example, when I was doing The Legend of Genghis Khan, I couldn't visit Mongolia even though I wanted to. So I did the next best thing. I read the travelogue of the Mongolist, John Mann. And he gave such beautiful descriptions of the steppes. So I was visually, feeling that I was right there. And that is what I tried to bring into my books as well. So though of course, I hadn't visited the steppes, and I obviously can't go back to the 11th century when Genghis Khan lived. But still, when I read John Mann's books, and I was so much into the place, that is what I also attempted to do when I was writing The Legend of Genghis Khan. So that's the next best thing, is to read the travelogues of people who've actually visited the place. The second thing is research throws up a lot of information. Now a writer has to decide what information is necessary for the book, because the book is the focus after all, and what to discard. So that is another decision that a writer has to take. What really makes historical fiction popular is when the reader can identify with the character. True, they do know about the character from history, but then he or she is just a name and a figure. Hi, Santosh. And the writer now needs to make that name into a human being with personality traits. A lot of people ask me, why did I choose to write about Nader Shah? He was supposed to be an invader and not liked by Indians. So why did I write about him? One reason, of course, was I was writing this, I'm writing this series of invaders. So the first one was Genghis Khan, and the next one is Nader Shah. But when I started writing about the man, I came to know so many small things about him, which made him into a complete human being. So it is those quirks, those peculiarities, or possibly the circumstances in which that character had to live, and therefore, the personality developed, is what makes that person a human being and not just a historical figure. So they have to be described graphically, and they become then a living, breathing human being. Every writer will have his or her way of writing historical fiction. But I follow this one rule very strictly. I never distort historical facts. So how do I then weave my fiction? So what I do is I lay out all the historical facts that my research has thrown up and try to see a pattern. Now, when you do that, there will always be certain gaps in the pattern. Obviously, those are the places where there was possibly no evidence, Now, I use those gaps. I weave in my fiction through those gaps, just like you do embroidery. And that is what makes my story also very plausible. So that is one rule I follow. I will never, ever distort facts, dates, events of history. I also believe that as a writer of historical fiction, I must make my readers jump into the era, into the period. So whether it's the 11th century, whether it's the 17th century, or whatever, maybe the period as well as the setting. I wrote about Mongolia. I wrote about Persia when it comes to Nader Shah. For that, I have to do a very, very careful study of all the customs, the clothes, the food they ate, the regional dialect, and then weave it into my story. So that when the reader reads, the reader is able to visualize the environment, be there physically and emotionally. Only then will a story become absorbing and a page turner. For example, there were these small things that I added when I was doing the Legend of Genghis Khan. For example, how did they eat? So they ate, they used to have this belt which they wore, and they had an assortment of knives which they always carried with them. So it started with a big hunting knife to a very thin, small knife which they used to cut tobacco. And they use knives to eat. So while this, whichever animal they would have hunted would be roasting on the spit, they would sit in a circle and they would cut the cooked meat, the roasted meat, with their knife and eat it with the knife. So this was something I came to know only when I did my research about Mongolians during the 11th century. And yes, Dr. John Mann was a great help. I also try to correct commonly held perceptions in a subtle manner. I don't, focus on them like they're just a part of my story. But then the readers get to know what is the factually correct event. One very commonly held perception is that Nader Shah raided India and he grabbed the Mughal Empire and the throne. But that's not true. The truth is that Muhammad Shah, the Mughal emperor at that time, actually handed the Mughal Empire to him, gave him the crown, which of course he did not take. He said that, rightfully it is mine, I know, but I give it back to you because all I want from you are annual tributes. If you can send those to me, then, the throne remains yours. I will not stay in Delhi. I will go back to Persia. So while it's not easy to write historical fiction, it is very, very interesting and satisfying. So now let me read to you something from my latest book, Nader Shah, The Curse of Nader Shah. So first let me read to you something that is of great interest to Indians, which is, when Nader Shah he conquered Delhi. How did he proclaim himself as the Shehenshah? So what was this, the magnificent, I would say, coronation that happened? So the entire description is there in my book. So I'll just pick out certain extracts from it and I'll read to you. In the name of the great and merciful God, victory to the Shehenshah, victory to the King of Kings, victory, victory, victory. That is how he was announced. Then came the man himself, alone, with nobody within 10 paces of him. In dignified splendor, he was arrayed like Solomon in all his glory. Knowing the significance of an impressive grand ceremony, he had laid aside his simple soldier's garb. On his head was a gold helmet, encrusted with gems and shaped like a crown. On its right side were the 4 heron feathers, the jik, that is the symbol of Persian royalty. So that is actually the symbol of Persian royalty. They don't wear a crown, they must wear this jik on the right side, which are actually 4 heron feathers, which is clasped by a jewel. So this one was clasped with a large ruby. A scarlet mantle trimmed with fur fell from his shoulders. Under it he wore a coat of gold. The Kashmiri shawl wound around his waist glittered with a jeweled dagger. His boots were of soft crimson leather, resting on stirrups of gold. His charger, a grey Turkoman, moved proudly under him. Its neck was adorned by a collar studded with jewels. Its bridle, headpiece and breastplates were of beaten gold, and the sun's rays sparkled on the jewels embedded in them. But Nader, the king of kings, did not hold a sepulchre. Instead, he held aloft his plain battle axe, reminding the spectators that he was the conqueror first and foremost. He had conquered the empire with the strength of his might. Nader dismounted and climbed the low steps, approaching his seat in the center of the hall. It was the extravagant peacock throne gifted to him by the Mughal emperor the day before. It was less of a chair and more of a raised dais, about 6 feet long and 4 feet wide. It stood on 4 gold feet, and every inch of its surface was studded with jewels, some of them very large, such as pearls the size of pigeons' eggs. Above the throne was a canopy supported by 12 pillars. On the inner side, the canopy was worked in intricate gold threadwork with diamonds and pearls, and a fringe of pearls went all around. Above the canopy was mounted a peacock of gold, whose plumage was made of sapphires and other precious stones. The huge Kohinoor diamond nestled in the front of the throne, surrounded by rubies and emeralds. High above the throne, on the walls of the Diwani Khas, an inscription was written in Persian. Garfedos baru zami ast, hamin asto, hamin asto, hamin ast, which means, if there is a paradise on earth, it is this, it is this, it is this. So you can understand how much research must have gone into this, because I really had to find out what the peacock throne looked like in those days. And I had to really search, the net and read books which describe the peacock throne, because nobody knows what it really looked like in those days, and where was the Kohinoor and so on. You will also have noticed certain color which was part of Nader Shah's dress as he came. They were all shades of red. So Nader Shah was renowned for the fact that he always wore red. Whenever he was seen, he always wore red. It was a signature color with him. Not only that, even the tents of his soldiers, when he was out campaigning, were red. He was so fond of the color. And there is, of course, speculation as to why he used that color, because the Persian kings, it was the Shahs of Persia, apparently before Nader Shah, would wear that color when they would pronounce death sentences. So it's possible that Nader Shah wanted to say to the people that, look, I'm wearing it all the time, so your lives are in my hands. So whether you live or you die is my decision. So maybe he wanted to give this message, and that's why he always wore red. Now let me read to you another part where which will help you to understand another thing about Nader Shah. He was an excellent military commander, and all through his campaigns, he had conquered a lot of lands. All through his campaigns, he would all the time be looking for soldiers, good soldiers, able soldiers for his army. As a result, his army had a variety of people from different regions. And there is one paragraph which gives you a very, very beautiful picture of the different kinds of soldiers that were there. So when this coronation was going on inside the Diwani Khas, outside the courtyard, thousands of men of the Persian army and its camp followers were gathered. Everyone was trying to get a glimpse of the grand proceedings within. These were fierce warriors who had marched triumphantly from the Caucasus to the Ganges, filling all Asia with their renown. They were from various nations, Turkomen with their flat Tatar faces and huge furry busbies, black-bearded stalwart Afghans in loose white clothing of sheepskin embroidered with yellow silk, Bakhtiari tribesmen from the mountains of central Persia, smaller men with different types of faces wearing round caps of white felt, Georgians from the Caucasus, white-skinned, handsome and reckless, wild Kurds from the western border who were said to worship the devil, Arabs from the plains watered by the Karun and the Persian Kizilbas, or the redheads, so named for their red hats, scissor-clipped beards and drooping moustaches. Among the soldiers were also women, the light loves, cloaked like the men and hardly distinct from them. So this is a description of his army. And now, let me read to you about an event which actually was the turning point in Nader Shah's life and possibly the reason why he, eventually was assassinated. Because this event gave him so much pain that he became a tyrant, something like, if I have pain, I must give pain out. And that is what made him so cruel. He killed so many people. He alienated all the loyalists that he had. And eventually that was the reason why people turned against him. And finally, he was murdered. So just listen to this one. Today, the man who had stilled innumerable hearts with hardly a twinge felt his own heart slowing to a pause. Standing in the shadowy doorway, his eyes darted into the gloom surrounding a small, flickering earthen lamp. A figure was framed in the narrow window slit, head tilted at a proud angle, the broad back stiff with anger. In one corner of the small room, buried in the bowels of the stone house, a woman draped in black wept softly, inconsolably. The man, not used to people turning their backs to him, wondered petulantly, what is so interesting outside the window that he cannot turn towards me? The thin slice of sky visible through the iron bars was nothing but black night, made denser by heavy rain clouds. What can he see there? See! Instantly the man's heart plummeted down to hell. He cannot see anything, wailed the emptiness inside him, for I have cut out his eyes. Yes, I did it. What made me do such a horrific thing? I am Nader Koli Afsar, the Shah of Persia, Hindustan, Turkestan, Afghanistan, Khwarizm. I am the Nader who flung Ottoman Turks out of Persia. I am the Nader who cleansed Persia of wild Afghans. I am the Nader who kept Russians at bay on Persia's borders. I am the Nader before whom rebels cringe. I am the Nader who commands the dreaded war machine of Persia. Yet, I am the Nader whose son has turned against him. I am the Nader whose son charged him with wild deeds. My son, I had no choice. To prevent treason, I ordered your arrest. You, my eldest, my precious boy, my heir. It was for you that I have fought, conquered and carved this empire with my sword. Yet it was I, a wretched father who gave orders to cut out your eyes, your two beautiful eyes, and bring them to me. Broken-hearted, the father stumbled across the uneven stone floor and clasped his arms around his son, frenziedly kissing the back of his neck. Tears coursed through the grooves on his cheeks as Nader whispered indistinctly, "My son, my son." The man at the window was still. He did not want his father to see his wounds. But now he turned. It was a terrible sight, horrifying empty sockets of raw flesh from which blood was still trickling down his bearded cheeks. Nader flung off an arm to shield his view. Finally, the wali ahead broke his silence. "You should know that by taking my eyes out, you have blinded yourself and destroyed your own life. It's not my eyes that you have gouged out, but that of Persia." Acid syllables dribbled into the abrasion festering in his conscience, making Nader flinch. It was at that moment that something died inside the indomitable conqueror. His son, Reza Koli Mirza's bitter rancor snuffed out what little life existed in the afflicted man. Death, his faithful slave, now became his master. It clutched at Nader's heart, although breath still passed through his body. This curse, this loss, this dousing of the desire to live was much greater than all the deaths his sword had wielded. Only the husk of his living body remained, its flame extinguished as the legendary Nader Koli Shah of Persia cried out in despair. What is a father? And what is a son? Lightning is only a soundless flash until it strikes. This time, it struck steel, and thus commenced the rusting of the sword of Persia. So that is a reading from the book, and I think if you want to read more, you will have to go and actually take the book and read it. And I hope you will like it, and you will let me know what you think about the book. And now, if there are any questions, I would like to answer them. Astha, Sopan Brahmachari, hello, how are you? So are there any questions, friends? If not, then let me conclude by saying that historical fiction is something that I believe readers need to read, and not just adult readers but young readers, because history is something that teaches us so much more about our present day. And I think that is the reason why historical fiction has become popular and should be popular. Sometimes I believe that there are times when these stories that we writers of historical fiction write can be even taken into the classroom, and students could also read it, because then history will come alive for them, and you'll never hear them saying that, how does it matter to us what people did so many years ago? It will matter, because you see, every event has a cause and a repercussion. So maybe there are so many things that are happening in our modern world which are actually, you know, a result of something that had happened in the past. So to understand what is happening in the present, we need to go to the past. And so that it's not so, boring, and it's not so drab, it would be nice if they could read stories about what happened in the past, and thus understand the present. So I think that's the reason historical fiction is a very strong genre that should be taken up by more writers, and they should be, taking out more books. And it'll be very nice if a lot of us would write for the young generation, because that would really, really help them to understand everything about the world that is happening today. So since there are no more questions, I will now bid you all farewell. And once again, thank you very much for being with me, and thank you so much for watching this, listening to me. And I hope all of you are taking care and you will remain healthy and safe and happy, even though the pandemic is raging outside. Thank you so much, friends. Good evening.